So in order to get these going side by side now, over in the Trello board.view file, let me take this wrapper div and add a few Tailwind specific classes to it. I'll start by adding flex, and notice that I get this autocomplete list of Tailwind classes that start with flex. Now, the reason my IntelliSense works like this, and maybe yours is not, is because I have this handy VS Code extension installed specific for Tailwind CSS. This gives me that great autocomplete stuff, some syntax highlighting, and linting. So I definitely recommend you install this extension if you're using VS Code. Alright, so when I hit save here, over on the right hand side, you can see that sure enough, our columns lay out from side to side and are no longer stacked vertically. Perfect. Let's also add some space between those columns with the gap class. And then I'll use the overflow X auto class to make sure we can scroll those columns horizontally whenever they start to overflow the x-axis of the page. This is exactly how it works in Trello. Then I'll also add the items start class. And what this is going to do is make sure those columns all start at the very top. Now, you didn't see an actual difference right now, but I'll show that to you in just a moment. Okay, so we can separate these columns just a little bit more by giving them a background color. So on this div that represents each of the columns, let's add a class of BG Ray, and let's say 200. Notice that I get this nice little color swatch here showing me what that color is going to be. This is once again thanks to that Tailwind CSS extension. I'll save that, and we do in fact get the gray background there. Let me continue on giving this just a few more classes. I'll start it with the class of column, and this won't be for styling. This is just for me to help me remember that this is the column element. I'll also give a little padding to each of the columns. Let's make the corners rounded. And how about we give each one a min width of 250 pixels. This just ensures that they all are a fairly consistent size. Great. When I hit save now, over on the right hand side, you can see that things are looking even better. And if we scroll from right to left, yeah, we get the proper behavior. Now, I did want to explain real quickly how this works. So I was able to put in an arbitrary value for my minimum width. The reason for this is that Tailwind works with a JIT compiler, J-I-T. That stands for just in time. What that means is that Tailwind doesn't have a predefined set of classes necessarily in a whole big list that it crawls through and then eliminates items from as it sees what you're using inside of your project. That's how earlier versions of Tailwind worked. The latest version of Tailwind is a little bit different, and yes, it does have a predefined list of classes, but instead it kind of crawls through your project and says, okay, what do you actually use? And then it generates a style sheet based on what's inside of your project. And therefore it can take these arbitrary values and then create classes on the fly that style these appropriately. If I hover over it here, you can see exactly what Tailwind is actually generating under the hood. So it's creating a class called min width 250 pixels here and just giving it a min width of 250 pixels. This is a really smooth and simple way of styling things with arbitrary value. All right, now all of our columns are resting snugly up against the top of the page. Let's fix that by going over to app.view, and let's add just a few classes to our wrapper div here. I'll give that a padding of 10. Now remember in Tailwind CSS, these paddings are really kind of like a scale. This doesn't mean 10 pixels. It's just this kind of arbitrary scale that Tailwind has come up with, and you can configure this specifically in your Tailwind config file, but usually the default values are great. Let's also provide a height of 100% of the viewport. And the reason I'm doing that is because I also want to give this a background color of teal. And that's just to match what we saw in that beginning video. Now, let me also add overflow auto here. And this is just going to mean if our board ever becomes longer than our actual page, because we're making this the height of the entire viewport, let me just make sure I can scroll up and down if I need to. All right. The last thing I want to do here is back in Trello board.view, let me just remove item start at this point so you could see what it looks like if we did not include that. Yeah, so now you can see that each of the columns is of equal height, so they all stretch to fill the same height. But that's not what we want, because that's not how the actual Trello application does it. So let me just put item start back in there. In this lesson, we've made some great progress actually getting something on the page and beginning to style it to look like a Trello board. In the next lesson, we'll continue doing this even further.